Okay, well, it's 6 o'clock, so we can go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our attendees and our panelists this evening. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Liz Smith. I'm the Creeks Outreach Coordinator at the City of Santa Barbara Creeks Division. We are celebrating Santa Barbara's 22nd annual Creek Week, which continues through Saturday. So we invite you to visit sbcreekweek.com or Facebook at SB Creek Week to check out the remaining events. We have quite a few fun presentations and tours coming up the next few days. We are recording this presentation tonight and it'll be posted on our YouTube page, which is at SB Creeks Division, if you'd like to view it again or share. And we will have time for a question and answer period following the presentation, so please feel free to submit any questions in your GoToWebinar panel. And to begin the presentation, I'd like to introduce my coworker here at the Creeks Division, our Water Quality Research Coordinator, Jill Murray.
Okay, let me start that again because I was muted. Thanks everyone for joining. For those new to the Creeks Division, we are part of the City of Santa Barbara and funded by Measure B. Our mission is to improve water quality and ocean water quality and restore creek habitat. And Liz, you can go to the next slide. My role is to coordinate water quality and research and the research and monitoring program. We do a variety of work on stormwater and beach water quality. And we're excited to share one of our newer projects, the study of microplastics. As you'll soon hear, microplastics are a problem for the environment everywhere, but we want to understand specifically what's going on in Santa Barbara. We want to know the magnitude of the microplastic problem here in stormwater runoff, or what we're discharging to our coastal ocean from our creeks. And we also want to know if there's anything we can do about the problem. For example, can street sweeping remove a significant portion of microplastics that are running off in stormwater? We are fortunate to be partnering with Dr. Patricia Holden and her students at UCSB, and we are also receiving funding from the UCSB Associated Students Coastal Fund, for which we are very grateful. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I want to touch on one more thing. So that'll be the next slide. Microplastics have gone from unheard of to a very popular Google topic in the last 10 years. And much of this interest is due to environmental concerns, but there's also the human health aspect, or the potential human health aspect. California is leading the charge to address microplastic pollution in the United States and probably globally as well. In 2015, microbeads in consumer products were severely restricted here in California. Then microplastics were found in drinking water, both tap water and bottled water, throughout the world and the country. And so in 2018, California passed Assembly Bill 1422 that requires testing of microplastics in drinking water and then determining if there is a human health risk. Researchers are still standardizing the methods and definitions, and they're drawing from the environmental research as well. But you can expect monitoring results and probably more news articles over the next 3 to 4 years about the human health aspects. While our research is focused on the environmental side, our studies and others will be used to inform and hopefully mitigate microplastic human health issues. And with this out of the way, I'm pleased to welcome the UCSB student researchers, Timnit Kefela and Becca Reynolds. Timnit's dissertation research is focused on understanding the sources, pathways, and fates of microplastics in urban soils and their proximal coastal environments, with an emphasis on exploring the role of green stormwater infrastructure and bioremediation as potential mitigation tools. Timnit's passion for urban environments stem from growing up in cities herself, and she firmly believes that the environment deserves to be healthy and pollution-free for communities like her own and beyond. Timnit is deeply passionate about accessible science and inclusive environmental futures. She led community-based initiatives focused on pollution remediation and increasing nutritionally dense food access in Camden, New Jersey, organized around centering environmental justice in solution making, and co-created spaces to center voices of minoritized scholars in environmental science and STEM nationally and internationally. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biology with a minor in English literature and a Master of Science degree in biology from Rutgers University, Camden. She'll be speaking first. And then Becca Reynolds' research focuses on the sources, transport, fates, and impacts of plastic and microplastic pollution. Much of her work entails extracting, characterizing, and chemically analyzing environmental microplastics and contributes to the design of source control and bioremediation solutions. Her research is rooted in public service and environmental stewardship with the broad goal of improving public health in frontline communities. Prior to joining the PhD program at the Brennan School of Environmental Science and Management at UCSB, Becca held leadership roles in the Girls in Science program and the International Conservation Committee as an educator at the San Diego Zoo. Becca received her master's degree from the Brennan School with specialization in pollution prevention and remediation and water resources management, and she holds a Bachelor of Science in Cell Biology from UC Davis. And they're both studying with Dr. Holden now. And with that, I will pass it on to Timney, and I expect a wonderful presentation.
Thank you so much for that, Jill, and thank you for that great introduction. Liz, could you go to the next slide, please? All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we talk about the not-so-micro problem of microplastic pollution, as well as potential actions we can take that will help keep microplastics from polluting our environment. Before we dive into the story of our ongoing research, I'd like to set the stage by introducing our main character here, and that is microplastics. So what are they? As their name tells us, they're small plastic particles. And in this presentation, we may also sometimes refer to plastics as polymers, which is another word to describe a material that's made up of very large molecules that are composed of smaller repeating molecules. So comes this question, where do microplastics come from? How do they impact our environment? Why should we care about microplastic pollution? And what can we do to help prevent it? So today we'll spend some time answering these questions to provide context for our research. Then we'll share what we have discovered so far, as well as the next steps of our study. At the end of this presentation, we will discuss some ways in which you can help minimize microplastic pollution in your community, and we will welcome your questions. Also, we hope to interact with you through the poll feature on this platform, so please feel free to answer questions as they arise, and we hope you have some fun with us as we get to talk to you about what we're really passionate about. Next slide, please. Awesome, thank you. As we've all experienced, plastics are everywhere. So we actually ask you to take a moment to look around you, wherever you may be. And how many plastics can you identify? So I'm gonna wait about 10 seconds while you observe your surroundings. Then if you'd like, you can answer our first poll question. Do you observe 0 to 5, 5 to 10, more than 10? All right. We'll give you about 1 more minute. Sweet, so let's close the poll. More than 10, so 75% of you said you observed more than 10. And honestly, that's not surprising because plastics are kind of everywhere. As you may know, as you have stated right here, plastics are everywhere. They're in our clothes, our computers, even our pantries. In fact, if I were to ask you if you interacted with plastic today and you told me you did not, I would want to know the specifics about how in the heck you accomplished that, because you've unlocked some super awesome secret and we all want in on it. But you know, we all interact with plastic, so it makes sense that they are indeed everywhere. The reason for this is because they're durable, they're malleable, relatively inexpensive, and can give us any desired material properties if we add the right chemicals. These dynamic materials have been such a big part of our built environment that we've produced 8.3 billion metric tons of it since 1950 when it was first commercialized. And so due to their ubiquity in our built environment, it is inevitable that we find them in our natural, suburban, and urban environments as well. Kind of like, think of the old potato chip bag that you've seen blow past you on a windy day, or candy wrappers on the ground, or food wrappers on the ground. These are easy to see with our naked eye. But a lot of the time, these plastics actually end up fragmenting and cannot be seen as easily by the naked eye. And these small particles are known as microplastics. Next slide, please. Sweet. So microplastics are plastics that come in all shapes and types. They're very diverse. And what is like a definitive thing about them in terms of size is that they're less than 5 millimeters in size, which, fun fact, is the width of a number 2 pencil eraser. They're categorized as either primary microplastics or secondary microplastics. Primary microplastics are designed to be less than 5 millimeters in size intentionally. So some great examples are plastic pellets, which are used as like starter polymers for bigger plastic items, glitter, if you love your crafts. I understand I love my crafts too, so glitter is definitely one of them. Microbeads, which used to be added into personal care products as like exfoliants, for example, is also a great example of a primary microplastic. And then secondary microplastics are plastics that actually fragment from larger plastic items, such as water bottles. And this is largely due to, say, sun exposure, which weakens chemical bonds, making the plastic more brittle and easier to break up when combined with some kind of force such as wave and wind action, as well as any kind of mechanical abrasion. Next slide, please. So just like plastics being everywhere, microplastics are everywhere. We found them in all kinds of places, from mountain ranges such as the Himalayas to the depths of the Mariana Trench, which is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth. We found them on the surfaces of our oceans and the sediments of our oceans, in our rivers, in our soil, in glaciers, in our atmosphere, in our stormwater, and sadly, in different organisms, both water-dwelling and land-dwelling. The fact that microplastics appear everywhere makes us, as scientists, wonder why we should worry about them. Well, plastics are not just plastics. And what I mean when I say this is that the plastics we come across in our daily lives, and which end up breaking up and moving through our environments, are not a single polymer themselves. Next slide, please. So let's consider the production of a tire. As oil and coal are refined, a compound known as naphtha is produced, which with the addition of natural gas creates the small units or monomers or building blocks known as styrene and isopropene, which are needed to create synthetic rubber, which is a type of plastic or polymer that we use for tires. So different chemicals are added, known as additives, to make the tire more durable, malleable, usable for driving a car. Imagine you driving a car. You don't want a tire that falls apart. You want to ensure that it maintains its integrity over time, right? So that's what they do here. Those additives allow them to do that. So when we drive said car and the tire grinds along the road, microplastics are produced. The tire leaves behind little bits of rubber. These microplastics are essentially the same polymer as the tire, just smaller in size. So they too come with all of these additives and chemicals. So some of these additives, just like the plastic item itself, can also change when they interact with water, sunlight, or living organisms in the environment. And these changes can create harmful byproducts, which in turn can end up in our environments and can have harmful effects on living organisms. Next slide, please. For example, microplastics may leach out their own chemical additives and harm organisms that ingest them. They may also act as carriers or vectors of different chemicals they come across on their pathway to the guts of organisms, like certain types of pesticides, for example, heavy metals, other types of pharmaceutical products, anything that they pretty much come across in the environment. So microplastics have even also been known to transport bacteria, some of which can cause illness. So let's look at this diagram here. Say the plankton consume these microplastics that have, say, an additive leaching out of them, or have an additive, or have something absorbed onto them and are acting as a carrier. And then a small fish eats them, and the toxins that they're carrying or are in them, and those toxins are released in the small fish's body. Then a larger fish eats the smaller fish. Then we eat the larger fish. Essentially what ends up happening in terms of like the toxin concentration levels is what scientists refer to as biomagnification, which is when you have any amount of a toxin, such as pesticides, in the tissues of organisms that can tolerate having like a little bit of that toxin in them at successively higher levels as it goes up a food chain. As you can imagine, because we are kind of at the top of the food chain a lot of the time, this may have health effects, have like pretty serious health effects on humans, since we're at the top of the food chain. and therefore may be exposed to the highest amounts of these toxins through the food we eat. So let's consider the routes in which we as human beings can be exposed to microplastics. So we're going to pose a question to you. How do you feel humans may be exposed to microplastics through consumption of these items? Do you feel like all of them are pathways? Do you feel like none of them? So I'll give you about 10 seconds. All right, let's see the results. All of the above, that is pretty correct. So it seems like 83% of you say all of the above. We have 17% that said fish, which is true, but microplastics have been found in all of these. They've been found in table salt, in tap water, in fish, in beer, you name it, they're out there. So this is something we think is worth paying attention to in terms of like understanding why these are a problem. So this also, however, raises the question, how do microplastics, say, enter water, for example, where organisms can ingest them? So next slide, please. Well, when someone throws plastic litter on the ground or a car drives on the road, this may generate secondary microplastics on impervious surfaces like concrete sidewalks and asphalt streets. When it rains, water moves over these impervious surfaces through urban creeks and storm drains and eventually into our ocean. This stormwater runoff has been found to transport microplastics all the way from our sidewalks and roads through the drainage system and into our coastal waters. Based on what we've discussed so far, do you think there may be a microplastic pollution problem in the city of Santa Barbara and our oceans? So kindly, quickly answer that poll. I'll give you about 10 seconds. All right, let's see the results. Yes, 100%. Yes, couldn't agree more with you there. There certainly is a microplastic problem in Santa Barbara, considering what we've told you thus far. So next slide, please. Well, in 2019, actually, researchers from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography collected sediment samples from the Santa Barbara Basin, which is located in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of our city. Next slide, please. And in these sediment samples, the researchers found microplastics, which are these colorful fibers, films, and fragments pictured on the right side of this slide. Our research story starts with this evidence. We know that microplastics are present in Santa Barbara's oceans, and we are curious to learn what we can do to keep future microplastic pollution out of Santa Barbara's ocean. So this is essentially where our research begins. We saw that there was evidence that there were microplastics in our sediments around here, and now we want to try and see if we can come up with solutions. So I'm now going to pass it over to my colleague Becca. Wow. I'm going to pass it over to Becca, who will be talking more about what we've been doing thus far.
Thank you so much, Timney, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. So I'll start by saying all research studies start with a main research question. And ours is, by what magnitude do street sweeping and storm drain screens, oh, next slide, please. My bad. Thanks, Liz. Thank you. By what magnitude do street sweeping and storm drain screens reduce the potential for urban runoff to transport microplastics into the storm drain network, creeks, and the coastal ocean in the city of Santa Barbara? We hypothesize that these mitigation measures do limit the quantity of microplastics particles per liter of stormwater entering Santa Barbara's creeks and coastal ocean during storm events. Next slide, please. Perfect. So what have we done so far with our ongoing study? Well, Jill and her team at the City of Santa Barbara Creeks Division collected stormwater samples from the first 2 storms of this rainy season. This collection occurred at the bottom of Mission Creek and Laguna Channel just before these drainages empty out into the ocean. And so you can see the general area where sampling occurred circled in black on the map on this slide. Jill and her team then extracted the solid debris from that stormwater and sent it to our lab. So at the Holden lab at UCSB on campus, Timnit and I performed another round of filtration on these samples. And then we looked at what was filtered out of the stormwater using a microscope. So we'd actually like to give you all an opportunity to see what we see when we're performing this type of analysis. So next slide, please. But before you do, you'll need to know what we're looking for. So here we have a key that scientists who study microplastics can use to help determine when they may be seeing a microplastic under a microscope. So as you can observe, microplastics can be categorized by shape and color. The shapes and colors that are listed on this slide more or less encompass the majority of microplastics that a scientist may observe in environmental samples. So take a minute to familiarize yourself with this key. You'll notice for fibers, they're long and thin, so their length is greater, usually 3 times greater at least than the diameter in terms of their shortest size. Fiber bundles are just an aggregate mass of about 20 or more fibers. Fragments are the microplastics where you kind of scratch your head and you're like, I can't describe it as any other shape. It's kind of unique, it's kind of funky. Films are just like larger films. So think of something like saran wrap, right? A foam, the way you kind of test for that is if you compress it, it'll bounce back. So we might take some tweezers and push on it. And then for a sphere, it looks like a ball. So again, they come in a variety of colors as well, and also different sizes. So now I'm going to show you an image of, or Liz is going to show you an image of what that we took using our microscope of actual debris from Santa Barbara stormwater. And you can help us count how many particles may be microplastics based on their shape and color. So before we put our poll up where we ask how many microparticles you count that you think may be microplastics, we'll give you a minute to sort of really look in detail at this image, because some will pop out to you, I think, that you may not have seen right away. And again, just for transparency's sake, we are going off of shape, size, and color when we're looking through the microscope and saying this may be a microplastic, this may not, this definitely is not. But until we test their chemical identity, we can't definitively say that they are a microplastic, but there is some pretty high confidence, for example, with that blue fiber, that that's synthetic material. So now that you all have had a chance to take a peek at what's in our image, Liz, do you mind opening the poll? You can let us know how many microplastics you observed in that microscope image. And again, that was that 40 times magnification. All right, let's see what the audience said. Oh, 3 to 5 or more than 5. Y'all have a good eye. Well done with your observational skills. And yeah, Timnit and I, when we were looking at that particular image in real time, we estimated between 3 and 5 of those particles were going to be microplastics. So well done. So next slide, please. So I'd love to share now with you what we found. So again, Jill's team sampled stormwater from 2 storms. So the first stormwater samples came from the first storm of this rainy season. We call that the first flush, and that took place in late December of 2020. And then they sampled again during the second storm of the rainy season, second flush, and that took place in early January 2021. So in our first stormwater samples, we found about 1.27 microplastics per liter of stormwater sampled. And for reference, a liter, that's about as much volume as my water bottle here would hold in terms of a liquid. And so then in stormwater 2, we found in about 1.58 microplastics per liter of stormwater. So even though these numbers sound small, it sounds as though there's not a lot of microplastics in our stormwater. It's actually an important snapshot of a much larger and more dynamic system. And these numbers indicate that microplastics are a pollutant that deserves our attention, especially when it comes to designing mitigation solutions. So we need to consider that this quantity of microplastics that we found becomes much larger as we take into account the total volume of stormwater runoff that's entering our ocean each year from our city. And so as we go about designing approaches to minimize microplastic pollution via stormwater runoff, it's important to know what the dominant morphologies of microplastics are, because microplastics will behave differently in the environment based on their size and their shape and their chemical composition. So before I reveal what our dominant shapes and colors and sizes of microplastics are, we would like to know what you think we found. So which microplastic shape do you think we observed most frequently in these stormwater samples? Okay, and everybody's an expert on knowing their microplastic shapes now. You've had practice. All right, let's see, Liz, what does the audience say? Okay, fragments, so fibers, 50%. Think that fibers were the most common. Awesome, fragments and films, good. Oh, and I forgot to ask, Liz, you're so on the spot. How many hours do you think Timney and I spent performing microscopy on just these two stormwater sample like debris? What do you guys think? I don't know, Liz, if you can go backwards, but if it's too hard for you, I'll just tell them.
What did you want me to do? Sorry.
Oh, I missed a poll question, I think.
Oh, I don't have that one in there.
That's okay. So
shape and color.
No, you're fine. So it took Timney and I about 60 hours of microscopy work to get the data that we're about to show you. Okay, so slide 18, please. So we'll reveal. And so a majority of the group really knows their microplastic research because, in fact, fibers were the most frequently observed shape in our samples. And what's interesting, so you see our table on the left is our results for storm 1. This table on the right is our results for storm 2. And I do want to point out briefly, you'll notice that the total number of microplastics we counted in each storm is listed at the bottom of the table. And there's 290 microplastics that we found in stormwater 1 samples and 718 we found in stormwater 2 samples. And this may be confusing because previously we said there was about 1.27 microplastics per liter in stormwater 1 and about 1.58 microplastics per liter in storm 2. And that's actually because when you adjust for how much stormwater we collected, those become equal outputs. So for storm 1, we collected 60 gallons of stormwater. And for storm 2, Jill's team collected 120 gallons of stormwater. And that's a standard practice for collecting these types of samples. So another interesting observation, just at quick glance, is that you can see that these shape categories kind of mirror each other across storms, where fibers between the two storms were the most common, and then fragments, films, spheres, fiber bundles, and foam. So now that we've talked about shapes, we will talk about the most frequently observed color. So Liz, we'll see what people think was the most frequently observed color. And this is just kind of fun. It's important to record the color because it is another distinguishing factor when you are observing environmental microplastics, but really what's most important is their chemical identity. And so their color is not always tied to that, but it's just it's an important thing still to note. All right, so let's see. What do we think the most common color was? Okay, yellow and blue tied, and then black and the pink. All right, so next slide, please, Liz. So the most common color we observed was blue across both storms. And then in the top 5 color categories, we actually see the same colors, just in different orders: clear, black, pink, green in the first storm, and then those same colors in a different order in the second storm. And then you start to see more variety of colors like orange and gray and purple. So moving on, next slide, please. We'll reveal the size classes as well. So interestingly, and Timnit and I are still kind of looking into the why behind this, but you'll see that in the first storm, a majority of the microplastics were actually belonged to the smallest size class that we were set up our experiment to collect. Whereas in storm 2, it was biased more towards the larger or relatively largest size class that we were filtering for during that storm event. And so I will leave it to you all, because you are all quickly became microplastic experts according to the polls responses, to think about why that may be. And Timnit and I are excited to share our analysis of that outcome when we wrap up this study. So next slide, please. And speaking of wrapping up this study, what are we going to do as we move forward? So far, what we found, what this means is that microplastics are moving from the city of Santa Barbara, from our lands here, into our ocean via stormwater. And now that we know that these terrestrial areas are a source of marine microplastic pollution, we can help to assess the efficacy of the city's current source control measures, which again includes street sweeping and storm drain screens. So remember our research question, which asks by what magnitude these mitigation measures reduce the potential for stormwater to transport these microplastics. So coming up next, Jill and her team will help Timnit and I collect samples from road surfaces, street sweeping, sand and wash water, as well as debris that's caught on the surface of storm drain screens, so that we can compare the quantity and morphology of the microplastics in the aforementioned samples to what we found in our stormwater samples. And so we will also use a really cool tool, which is called an attenuated total reflectance Fourier transform spectrometer, or ATR FTIR, which you could see down in the bottom right, after we finished our filtering and our microscopy. And using this tool, we'll be able to analyze what types of polymers we find. So for example, we can say that this particular microfiber that was blue and it was this long is polyester. And that may be like something that we could come from our clothing, right? Clothing is typically, it can be made from polyester. Or we may find a fragment and we can say, oh, this is polyethylene, like something that a grocery bag, a plastic grocery bag would be made of. So this will tell us even more about where these microplastics may have come from. And so what we find through our research study may support the argument for more effective microplastic pollution mitigation measures in the city of Santa Barbara. And this could lead to pilot programs that explore the most effective methods of diverting large plastics as well as microplastics from entering local storm drains, urban creeks, and coastal ecosystems. And at a broader level, this project is designed to be scaled across the state of California. So municipalities can replicate the project to collect information, which will clarify the role of runoff as a vector of microplastic conveyance to marine habitats from one region to the next across the state's coast. So next slide, please. Well, while we work to finish our research study, what can we all do as a community to prevent microplastic pollution from entering our environment? So as Timnit explained, plastics are such a big part of our built environment, it's almost impossible to avoid them. And especially for some of us, plastics are a crucial component of our lives. For example, some folks need to use a straw, and that's something that we should acknowledge and respect. So if we, as individuals, each have the means to divest from plastic in whatever ways we can try and limit our use of it by making substitutions. For example, using a reusable water bottle instead of a plastic one. But I want to acknowledge that this solution can be a privileged one in particular, because you're only able to do that if you have water infrastructure that you trust. So this applies to pretty much all plastic substitution approaches, which is just a way of saying, based on who you are and where you live and what your privileges are, you can take a look at where you encounter plastics in your day-to-day life and where it would be reasonable for you to find alternatives to those products that are not made of plastic. So educating ourselves and others about the effects of what we consume and where what we use ends up is important to making conscious decisions within your capability to do so. A really effective thing everyone can do is you can express concern writing letters or emails or calling your local, regional, state legislators and ask them to focus on plastic production and plastic waste management legislation and solutions. So industry people as well can make a conscious effort to create materials that have limited effects on human and environmental health. And we can also, as citizens and community members, hold these corporations accountable through policy that emphasizes extended producer responsibility. So next slide, please. With that, Timney and I would like to thank you very much for your time, and we welcome any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you both. I will remind our viewers, if you have any questions, please submit them through the questions pane on GoToWebinar. We have a few so far. Summers asked if glitter is a microplastic, which you kind of mentioned, Timney. And then she said, okay, then is all glitter microplastics?
Most glitter are microplastics. There are folks who are trying to push towards creating glitter that is bioplastic based, but I say heed when you're deciding to use, say, something that's bioplastic, what does that truly mean? Think about what happens to it when it's like thrown away. Are they saying that it's going to degrade in, say, specific conditions that probably wouldn't exist out there in our natural environments? It would have to be within like a waste management facility. So I'd say if you could avoid the use of glitter, do so. But much of the glitter that's out there is indeed plastic, sadly.
Okay, next, Nicole asked, where are the fibers coming from?
I can take this one. So research in this area has shown that microfibers that are found in the environment, one major source of those microfibers is textiles. So it could be anything from the industrial production process to laundering your clothing at home. So there are different mechanisms of release based on those different actions. So industrial production could be releasing microfibers into the air, into our atmosphere. They can also be releasing it into our waterways during any type of washing or dyeing processes based on how they manage their liquid effluent. Likewise at home, and I think this is really important for folks to know, is when you wash your clothing and you're in a washing machine at a laundromat or in wherever you may live, those microfibers are liberated from your clothing and they exit your washing machine and move through your sewers into the wastewater treatment plant for your local community. As well, when you dry your clothing in your dryer, the lint trap catches a certain amount of that, those released microfibers, but many of them are transported just directly through that vent and right out the side of your home or the laundromat. They just end up on the ground, and then they actually can be picked up by stormwater runoff. So something you can do, again, is just thinking about what our behavior is as consumers, and really how often you need to wash your clothes. So there are definitely ways that you can think about maybe purchasing less to begin with, and then thinking about how often you go without washing your clothes and maybe waiting until they're truly very soiled or, you know, not comfortable to wear, so to speak. And that's going to be different for everyone, but it's just, that's the most effective way to minimize microfiber emissions from like a community-based standpoint.
Thank you. So the next question is from Alan, and he asked, is Santa Barbara installing water refill stations around the city?
Let's see. I'll take that. So that would be that's a great way to decrease the use of single-use plastic bottles. And the Parks and Rec did just install there was a ribbon cutting recently for installing 2 new water bottle filling stations at 2 different parks in the city. And I'm hoping we can look forward to more. I think that's a great approach.
Thanks, Jill. And I think Community Environmental Council led that installation of those 2 stations.
Okay, and they've put them in schools all over as well.
Great. So we had a question from Nicole. Can you talk about extended producer responsibility and what that looks like?
Yeah, I can definitely touch on that. So essentially what that is ensuring if you're producing a particular product that you're taking into consideration the end of life. So where is it going to end up essentially? Is it going to end up in a landfill? Are you going to have a take back program whereby you require people to send back things in order for them to reuse like different elements of whatever is like done for or at its end of life? So there's been this push at the policy level, a lot of people organizing around having more extended producer responsibility regarding plastic production. And that's meaning like, you know, having proper recycling programs, proper take back programs, not just doing it as a, hey, this would be cool and we're kind of green kind of approach, but just being like ensuring that you have the right structure to ensure that these take backs are happening, this reuse is happening. The perpetuating of a circular economy essentially is happening, and you're producing less waste, and instead you're using your waste as feedstock for new products. That's a pretty circular way of explaining that, but that's essentially what extended producer responsibility is, holding the producers responsible for the end of life of the products that they are producing. So it's not fully just like fully remaining in the hands of the consumer themselves. So yeah.
And another hypothetical example that's relevant to the Creeks division is throughout the state, there's a new trash requirement for our stormwater permits, and it requires screens in all of our catch basins. Well, it doesn't require it. There's different ways to comply with this new rule, but one of the most popular is to put screens in the catch basins with holes that are exactly the size of cigarette butts. And so I learned that an effective extended producer responsibility would be that the cigarette butt manufacturers are the ones who pay for installing those screens and maintaining that. It's going to cost our city and every city throughout the state millions of dollars to comply with this rule, and that could be put in the hands of the producer of that pollutant.
And Jill, thank you for bringing that up, because back to the microfiber question, fairly recently, within just the last year, there has been research that shows that while all of these emerging sources of microplastics are being identified, and the textile industry is sort of the first to be identified as major microfiber emitters, cigarette butt filters are made of cellulose acetate microfibers, which are a type of plastic microfiber, and based on like material flow analyses, their emissions through improper disposal are very similar magnitude to emissions of microfibers from the textile industry.
So that is new. I haven't heard that. It's very interesting. I have a number to throw out. When you were talking about approximately 1.5 particle per liter of stormwater, and you said maybe that doesn't sound like much, but I was trying to quickly do a back of the envelope calculation, and I found our estimate of our total discharge from all of our creeks and all of our runoff from all of our storms in an average year. And so if we were to just do a back of the envelope calculation, that would mean we were contributing 6 trillion microparticles to the coastal ocean every year. And we're one small city. So it really is a problem, and we really do need to learn more about it.
Thank you for
appreciate your presentation and the work you're doing with the city so much. Really looking forward to getting our next round of sampling and results in.
Likewise. Thank you all so much, and thank you for putting that number into perspective.
We have a couple more questions coming in. Angie asked, have you or will you be testing wastewater outflow, like water that's been through the treatment process?
We are not going to be testing that. I do imagine that that will be coming down the road for most wastewater treatment plants. There was a big study in San Francisco Bay by the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and they quantified the contribution of stormwater runoff, I think windblown contributions and wastewater discharge, and they found that they were, I think wastewater discharge and stormwater is actually much higher. It's a lower concentration, but there's so much more of it over the course of a year.
And that's predominantly because in wastewater treatment plants, microplastics are going to settle into the solids phase. So where we see the continuation of this pollutant pathway from wastewater treatment plant point is actually into our lands. Because a lot of times those solids are treated, and if they are below a certain threshold of contamination, they're applied to our agricultural lands as a soil amendment. So about usually in highly efficient wastewater treatment plants, over 90% of the microplastics that enter are going to end up in the solids. So we see like these huge numbers of microplastics exiting the wastewater treatment plant in liquid effluent. That's just sometimes 1% of what is then ending up on our lands or in landfills or things like that. So,
yeah. And to add to that point, there was a recent study that looked at synthetic microfiber emissions from laundering and just comparing like where their fates would be regarding land. Are the concentrations the same of what like ends up going into the ocean versus what ends up going into land? And they were pretty comparable. That was largely due to biosolids applications into land. So that is something to definitely take into consideration. But there is a multitude of great studies that are coming out that look into how wastewater treatment plants could be used in limiting the movement of microplastics into our receiving environment.
Thank you. I just want to give you an update from my coworker in Parks and Recreation. Let us know that there are 3 filling stations in the parks: so Alameda Park, Shoreline Park, and Bonet Park. And then we have another question from Nicole. She says, where are the other places that you're disseminating this research? It seems like you could be inspiring our youth and teens in schools.
These 2 are great. Maybe you can get connected to, I think there is a program at UCSB that does send students into classrooms. I know you're both very busy, and I think it's mostly undergrads that tend to participate in that program, but maybe you could work with them and be guest speakers. There's also the AVID program in our schools. You'd be great speakers in it for AVID. And then Santa Barbara County Education has a volunteer speaker program that's really easy to sign up for and do, and I would recommend that you do that.
Also, Explore Ecology, one of our partners in organizing Creek Week, and they provide a lot of our youth watershed education. So Nicole just mentioned that in our comments, and that's a great tip too. We have another question. What is the grossest thing you have seen in a stormwater sample?
I love that question. Sydney, I don't know, do you want to go first?
I say wow us first, and then I'll try and rack my brain because I
Oh,
find a
geez.
lot
I
of
mean,
things.
yeah, I mean, it's never like, ew, yuck, but my threshold for disgust is pretty high. So having worked at a zoo for 7 years, you come across a lot of really nasty bodily emissions from animals and children. But I would say it's more of the shock value of being zoomed in 40 times on a magnification on a microscope and coming across just the exoskeleton of like a insect's head, just like looking right back at you. But yeah, it's always kind of going through my mind of like what else is in here that I can't see, because you know it's there. But yeah, I don't know, Timmy, did you think of anything?
Honestly, no. Similar to you, I do have a pretty high threshold for gross stuff, considering that I've like analyzed wastewater samples, so I've seen it all. So I think for the most part too, though, even while we're looking at those samples, like yes, we can kind of like estimate that or like deduct that that might be a plastic. It's kind of hard to be like, where's that from? Specifically. Which is why we say extended producer responsibility is definitely an important and effective strategy that needs to be taken into consideration with the plastic problem. So yeah, I don't think I've really seen anything that I've absolutely been disgusted about. I'm just like, yeah, sure, checks out.
We'll let you know if we get lucky, if we come across something.
Jill, do you have an answer for this one?
Oh, well, not from sampling necessarily, but just from walking, doing creek cleanups. Oh, yeah, all kinds of ick. Yeah, I don't even want to say it, Piles of feces are the worst, the absolute worst.
Okay. If anybody else has any last questions, please type them in. Otherwise, I would just thank you again so much for attending. As I mentioned earlier, we have recorded this presentation, so we will add it to our YouTube page, which you can find at SB Creeks Division on YouTube. Creek Week continues through this Saturday. Visit sbcreekweek.com or find us at SB Creek Week on Facebook and check out the remaining events for the week. And to learn more about the City of Santa Barbara Creeks Division, you can visit us at sbcreeks.com. Like I said, check out our YouTube page, SB Creeks Division, and find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at SB Creeks. So, yeah, not seeing any other questions come in. So if the rest of you have any other final comments, I think we're about done.
I actually had one question I wanted to ask. Would buying organic cotton clothing be advantageous? Or are there just synthetics used every step of the way that we don't even know about anymore?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the thing about cotton is that a lot of the research regarding their effects is emerging, because believe it or not, cotton actually sheds more than synthetic clothing. But the thing is, the dyes used are not natural, they're synthetic. So there are certain types of additives that are put in through the process that might actually be a problem, but there's no definitive yes as it being a better option. So that's why I think the best approach normally with how we can do to limit, say, our microfiber emissions is just being wary about how much we're consuming in terms of clothing. If we can buy secondhand, we can buy, like that would be encouraged. And also just, sometimes when you stain something, you're like, oh, wow, this is dirty. I'm going to throw this entire thing into the wash. Just be mindful. Like you could see if you could just like isolate the stain and clean it out instead of having to like run an entire washing machine load and have like microfibers emit from your clothing as well. So yeah,
Okay.
so the consensus is still out there.
Okay.
Like there's no definitive that's the right way.
There's something to say too regarding the water footprint that comes from cotton production versus polyester production, and considering regionally where the textiles are produced and where they're sold. And so a lot of the data that is referenced in these publications about what's more sustainable or less sustainable comes from life cycle assessments. Right now, the group that kind of manages these software programs that allow for life cycle assessment, there's no environmental impact indicator for microplastic pollution. So there's this huge knowledge gap where it's like, it would be great to be able to compare, like, what's the trade-off for cotton? Like, are we saving water by using non-cotton materials? But then are we creating more of a microplastic pollution, and which one is more impactful? So hopefully, like, as you said, Jill, like, this is such a sort of hot topic. As it starts to grow, hopefully we'll see more established, like, approaches for assessing sustainability fold this pollutant in, so we can really start definitively making those decisions, both on an industry and individual level.
Thank you.
All right.
Hey, thank you.
All so much for giving this presentation. We really appreciate it, and we hope you enjoy the rest of Creek Week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.